Welcome to the IT Matters Podcast, where we explore why IT matters and matters pertaining to IT.
Welcome, everyone, to the IT Matters Podcast. Aaron, how you doing?
I'm good, Keith. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. What's been going on in your life? I know you returned from the wonderful world of rainforest and leche stores. What have you been up to the past
just
weeks?
loving this fall upon us right now, where we don't have to walk outside and immediately change shirts. Cooled off a little bit. And yes, I just got back from Costa Rica. Highly recommend anyone check that country out. I was near Tamarindo, and it is a very cool place. Wonderful people. I felt very safe and had a good time. So lots been going on with me. How about you, Keith?
Well, I haven't returned from Costa Rica, so I'll take a notch down from that. But very busy. Fall's coming around. Just aerated my yard, and I'm trying some new grass seed. So I'm excited to see what the results are. Trying to get that in before the leaves fall so they don't suffocate. That's my non-work preoccupation this week, at least. But we have an exciting guest on the podcast today, Denver Hunter. Denver Hunter is the director of IT of PenServ, which is a full-service third-party administrator based out of Columbia, South Carolina, as well as the CTO of Small Town, which is a graphic design firm. He's also an official member of the Forbes Technology Council. Early in life, Denver decided that the best was for him, so he decided to brush up against the best and brightest, graduating from the University of South Carolina. Welcome to the IT Matters Podcast, Denver.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you both for having me, and look forward to the discussion.
Denver's definitely our best dressed podcast guest to date. So if you're watching this on video, you get to see our superlative for best dressed so far.
Thank you. I appreciate that honor there.
So tell me, Denver, before we begin, what drove you to seek excellence and become a Gamecock?
Man, just years of sitting through all those football games, right? No, I love my school, love my town, love Columbia. I'm from a little ways up north of there, but just a great campus, a great environment. And it was just a good time to go spend there and get my degree and spend those 4 years there. I ran on the 4-year plan. And from there, it's just natural dive into tech. It's always interested me since I was a little kid, and since I taught myself how to build websites basically back in middle school.
How long have you been in Columbia? Did you grow up there?
So I grew up in a little town kind of northeast of there called Camden. Really, our claim to fame are two major things. We have 2 Revolutionary War battlefields, and we have the Carolina Cup now. We used to have the Colonial back in the day, but so we're the steeplechase capital of the world, actually. Very few people know that, but it's a great time, a lot of fun times, especially back when they had College Park. But so I grew up there, and then Columbia was just kind of a natural progression. Spent a lot of time there. Still spending a lot of time there these days with my kids.
What does the tech industry look like in Columbia nowadays? I know it's become a little more trendy. I actually grew up not too far from Columbia as well, in probably the more well-known city next to Camden called Lugoff. But no, that was an inside joke. Denver would understand. But yeah, what's the tech scene in Columbia look like today?
So the tech scene here has been growing. I call it a well-kept secret, if you will, because we don't have some of the prominence of some of the major areas and the hubs you think about, but there's really a lot going on here from a company side, from a company perspective. We had a gentleman by the name of Todd Lewis who used to put on some great open source conferences here that actually has kind of merged and moved up to Raleigh, where it's even grown even more. But there's still a connection there with that, as well as a few other groups that get together. And there's still some businesses that are doing some pretty amazing things in this dock. And then coming up in Bull Street, that's going to be an exciting area. That's brought in some tech names already. And so I look forward to more growth with that and continuing. And it seems like the government's done a good job in the area with kind of fostering that quietly.
Well, hopefully they get louder here in the future and you guys can continue to grow. Some of the things that I really found interesting with your background is you have familiarity around banking and some of their concerns when it comes to artificial intelligence. There's a lot to talk about, particularly around personal information, credit card data, bias training. Could you share with our audience a little bit about your background and some of what you know when it comes to these concerns?
So I came around from a bank that was just shy of $1 billion here in the state. We were a state bank. The biggest thing, AI was already here in a lot of ways, particularly in the card market and things like that. But, obviously with the hype cycle kind of hitting what it is and hitting that sort of all time, and you're hearing AI this, AI that, companies making money off of it. The FDIC, who's our regulating body, became very concerned about it. And a lot of the discussion, and we even had a series of table talks, and a lot of those discussions were based around what to think about with AI, because AI is your traditional tech issue, right? You've got this new technology, you've got this new thing. Nobody really understands it. It's unfolding right now as we speak. And so all this is going on. Well, AI factors into a lot of things in banking. And I mean, most prominently would be fraud, right? Because at the end of the day, all these big card companies are conducting fraud analysis and trying to predict, capture, quickly fix, head off all the instances of fraud that we have going on. And I mean, that's something that anybody in the industry deals with. I mean, people want money either through legitimate purposes or nefarious purposes. And so AI has been spilling over a lot into that. But part of that concern is that as AI, kind of moves on from that and comes into other roles like making credit decisions, is AI going to be fair? Because there may be systemic biases that get put into AI that we're not even thinking about, but that the decisions, the criteria going into the decision, the algorithm, if you will, of making these decisions is causing an unfair advantage to a certain party or group of people with a certain. So, we're back in that territory of potentially looking at redlining, and it's kind of back again, but in a different way, right? So a lot of thought is going to that right now. And a lot of thought is going to how can we check? How can we make sure? How can we verify the data and not make these unfair decisions that, nobody's intending to be unfair, but the result, the outcome may be unfavorable.
It's interesting because we talk a lot about AI on this podcast, and I think we'll kind of get into it a little bit more today. A random question for you with where you're at right now as an IT leader at a financial firm, taking a step back holistically, how is the raising interest rates and kind of the economy where we're at today affecting the way you all run IT at a financial organization? Like, is it changing it? If so, what is it changing? What do you kind of predict for the next year or two?
Right. No, that's a good question. So like everybody else, I mean, I always joke, IT is the expensive baby in the room, right? It's the huge budget. It's the core software. It's all everybody's computers and peripherals. So we are going to be, if not the most expensive, one of the most expensive line items in the budget. And so, I mean, with the interest rates and with decisions like that, you have to start looking at AI from a perspective of helping you maybe not, we've all lived through this crunch in personnel. So you're looking at AI as potentially replacing some of that, and not in the sense of, we're going to fire the whole department and our coders and programmers are just going to be AI models, but in the sense of how can I leverage AI for my employees more efficiently to maybe get more done with fewer people, or how can I leverage AI from a customer perspective to improve the customer experience, improve customer retention and access to data. So we're looking at it all full spectrums, because my mindset is that AI is going to, this hype's going to cool a little bit. There's still going to be some amazing things to come out of it. I think we've already seen that. I mean, just what's being inserted into the average home with Bard and ChatGPT is already amazing enough, right? And it's already starting to change things enough. My heart goes out to college professors, because how the heck are you going to grade an exam, especially a written one right now, or a take home? How are you going to do that? Because you don't know who's writing it anymore. But from a business perspective,
AI too.
There you go. But from a business perspective, if I can improve people's efficiency in writing emails, or I can improve people's efficiencies in making a decision, or whatever the case may be, then I can concentrate more resources on other things and work on improving those areas. So that's kind of where the driver is going for me, in that I think AI is going to be a help to most people rather than replacing most people.
You're saying basically that you think using your resources smarter to be able to do more work with less, try to keep costs down because of the rising interest rates, et cetera. If that's a goal for you. For AI specifically, and like how you implement this, at a financial institution, there's usually more controls, more regulation around it. How do you safely encourage people to test and use some of the tools that are out there? Because one of the knocks on AI is you have to be careful, don't put sensitive data, it can create hallucinations, et cetera. How do you encourage people to use it, but also use it safely?
So that's another good question. But so at the end of the day, you've got to understand what you're potentially implementing, because with a lot of these models, where is the data going to reside? How is the data going to be used? I mean, the conversations even in the media right now are all about that, because there's this kind of this pendulum swing of where's our data really at? What's AI really storing? I mean, I think Elon Musk was in the news because he was mentioning how many, internet websites AI is using and pulling content from, scraping content from, ultimately to learn and spit this information out. And so that becomes, some ethical questions there, but from a financial perspective, especially, that becomes a very big concern about where the data is being stored. So I think, number one, you got to seek to understand that. And as an IT leader or anybody involved in IT, really, you need to start understanding how that works, because we've got Copilot coming out, we've got Bard out there, we've got all these tools, and you've got to understand that employees may use those tools, even though you may not be in a focus group right now, or you may not be piloting those things. So, anybody can go get on Bard right now, anybody can go get on ChatGPT right now and start spitting out data. So I think from a perspective is you've got to realize what's coming and what your users probably are already doing and get out in front of that. And so that, it's just like, I view it a lot like phishing training, because you've got to do it. And people are going to click those emails, and you've got to constantly hit over the head. You're going to have to do the same thing with AI from an organizational perspective. And then as you adopt it yourself, it's going to be putting it through rigorous testing. I mean, again, you go back to, is the outcome of this decision that we're letting AI make going to be the correct outcome? So you're going to have to do some very rigorous testing, some very rigorous understanding of the parameters, down to prompts. I mean, learning prompts is going to be its whole art form. It already is. There's already several jobs out there that are paying quite handsomely for that. So that all factors into a very rigorous program, a very robust program of implementation of AI. This is not just something you can kind of turn on and say, hey, let's see what happens. You've got to have a plan.
For the listeners out there, by the way, Denver mentioned Bard, ChatGPT already. I think everyone is pretty familiar with those. For those that are not familiar with Copilot, Copilot is Microsoft's not internal, but it's their tools that they're starting to roll out within the Microsoft ecosystem for AI. Denver, I was going to say, Apkala, we were in part of the beta, which was kind of cool. We were able to see some of the features already. And it's crazy. And I was talking about this yesterday with someone. I sit on a nonprofit board, and nonprofits for years have dealt with, note taking and bylaws and all this stuff. And I was trying to tell them, I'm like, I don't think we need to follow much of this anymore, because I can turn on Copilot and it'll do most of this for me, and it'll save all the time. And once again, you have to think about the data you're storing, what you say, it's all going to be recorded, but some of it should drastically improve your productivity. So a little plug for, Apkala, we're starting to see some of it. We've got a lot of folks in the Microsoft ecosystem, and if anyone listening's out there is interested in learning a little more about Copilot, find us on LinkedIn, and happy to share some of the things we've betaed. One other question for you, Denver, on just AI in general. Like, you've talked about finding ways high level, and you mentioned a few specific examples about like writing emails. What is the most creative use case that you've seen for AI so far? And it could be at work and in the business, or it could be your side business. It could be in your personal life. Like, what's the most creative use case for AI you've seen so far?
I think the one that's impressed me, and it's probably some of your listeners are probably going to groan, but I think it's interesting watching the application of AI in coding and programming, because, again, it's not going to replace the person, but I've seen folks use it. I've used it for some of my own problems with mixed results, I'll add, but you can go out and you can get an answer to something. And oftentimes you're seeing that second, third level of follow through that may not be on a website or in Google search or whatever else to get the information. So you're looking at a tool that not only can do that, but then could write some of your functions for it. So you're speeding up, you're making that person doubly as productive in being able to pull some of those functions in. So really, to me, that's been the most, and it's not amazingly crazy sexy, but it really, from a leadership perspective, from an IT person perspective, that's really driving some efficiencies and going to help improve what goes on in that world.
Denver, have you had any exposure with Microsoft Copilot, or are you familiar with what that is?
I'm very familiar with it. Unfortunately, I was not in on the beta, so a lot of my information has been secondhand at this time, but I've been reading up on it a bit and working through it, and understanding the implications of it and what it can do. I mean, the note-taking feature being a great example of the kinds of things that I think you can deploy from the start.
What kind of impact? Like, imagine your entire organization leveraging and when I say all the features, no one ever leverages all the features. Most of the time, you install a tool and 10% to 15% are leveraged, but that's also because many of those features have to be manual. If they built in mechanisms with the solution that leverage the features on their own behalf and are self-starting, such as simply recording a meeting, all we have to do is set the meeting to record, and it automatically takes the notes. It'll automatically put it into a bullet point format, and then we can command it to transfer the data from the meeting to an Excel file. What does that mean for an organization if everyone is using it? What do you think this leads to?
Well, I mean, I think truthfully, and this is something I've preached even before AI came along, but in looking at what tasks you can automate, what tasks you can move along, and looking at process management, those repetitive tasks that nobody really wants to do, but you have to, taking notes at a meeting, those tasks that just take time out of your day, left brain versus right brain. Okay, I got to shift gears to do this. I think the efficiency gains, the productivity gains from that will be monumental. And I think it's really, again, it's not that sexy when you kind of look at it at the first, but when you really start adding up how much, so-and-so's in meetings all day, Zoom meetings, in their Teams meetings, whatever, just taking the notes from that is already going to give you time back. And that might be 1 or 2 more meetings a day. Across 10, 20, 30, 100 employees, that starts to add up, right? Well, now you start getting those efficiency gains in multiple areas. I think, I kind of laugh. We used to all have and I can't even think of his name, but the old Microsoft paperclip that used to be in Word years and years ago. That tool is actually going to now be able to suggest fixes and kind of intelligently learn what you might not be good at. I mean, my example is always the person maybe sending emails is not really their thing. They're a great talker, but they're not the best emailer. And sometimes they tend to leave things out or be a little too vague. Well, then you've got an AI tool that can kind of come in and say, hey, here's the better way to write this so you don't sound angry. Hey, here, did you forget to do this, that, and the other? In that kind of application, I don't know that you can measure that right now, but I do know that is, common to all of us. And there's all those little tasks that we can help do. I mean, from an IT perspective, can you imagine IT? A lot of the log reviews and a lot of the analysis and analytics, you're now going to be able to automate even further with AI that are going to give you results that are as intelligent if you devoted an employee to looking for that. So I think a lot of that is going to kind of just compound on itself as we deploy these tools. And, something like Copilot, where it makes it kind of easy to plug in and as a product offering is, fairly clear. It's still a little vague, but I think they've done a decent job of, okay, this is what it's going to do. This is how it's going to work. Then, organizations can implement that. And like you said, those features are already on. It's not going to be a case of, I'm not going to touch it. It's going to be right there. And you're going to get some of those wins of, hey, here's a way that I can help you, AI speaking, do X, Y, Z. So that's going to be kind of more in your face and more something that you're more aware of than just launching a software product that's going to sit there and you got to click the button and interact with it to get it to do anything.
Denver, so it's interesting. Keith asked about it, and you talked about log reviews. If you had to give advice to others about how you coach non-IT people, how to use some of these tools, because I think that's going to be a big challenge of IT people are usually willing to try and test and fail
right.
And try again, because that's just the nature of a lot of the, stereotypical IT person. I think other departments are not so willing to do those things. So how do you, or how do others in your role make sure that people are trying these things? And what do you do as a director in an organization to try to push